I got a little essay, I guess you could call it, a little sort of a miniature instructional manual that George Gibson put together, I think in the 90s. And in it he tells you, breaks down note for note how to play, how he plays Darling Cora and Reuben, old Reuben, Reuben's Train, whatever title you want to call it. I'll show you real quick. Here's the type, this is George's simplified tablature. And he gives you the words along with it, and then he gives a little introduction. I'm going to read some of this to y'all. I don't think he'll care. So he's discussing the tuning here, and which is GC, GCC. And George says, I learned this tuning from my father, Mal Gibson. I have never heard anyone else use this tuning. I am fairly certain, however, that B.F. Shelton used it for the recording he made of Darling Cora in the 1920s. So that's a good hint. Look up on the internet, look up B.F. Shelton, Darling Cora. And I believe that recording from the 20s, they'd spelled it Darlin with no G, Darling Cora. And you'll hear, he picks it on the banjo, and I think he's finger picking, and it sounds pretty similar to this. So he goes on to say, George here is writing in the 1990s, he says, I learned this tuning from my father, Mal Gibson, who learned to play around 1905 to 1910. His playing had elements of an archaic playing style that is rarely seen or heard anymore. The next page gives an approximation of Darling Cora as it was sung. So that's some interesting information. Okay, let's go through it up close again. I'm going to show you a very simple way. So we're GC, GCC. The whole thing is mostly played off the 4th fret. You come down to the 5th a couple times, and that's really about it. And so here's the way the whole thing, it starts out. Wake up, my darling, what make you sleep so sound? Them highwaymen are riding, gonna burn this whole damn town. Saying old-timers did not always play a song note for note as it was sung. My father had a series of notes he interspersed when playing Darling Cora that went something like this. Okay, so some of y'all may have noticed in that little demonstration of Mal Gibson's instrumental run, I was showing you some of those alternate string pull-offs, or open string pull-offs that are that are sort of indicative of East Kentucky banjo playing. George in the 90s described that technique, what we call today an ASPO or an OSPO. He calls it a pluck. He differentiates this from a pull-off. The pull-off is where you note a string with your left hand, you pick it with your right hand, and you pluck it with your left hand, right? What a pluck is a string that you just pluck with your left hand without actually picking it with your right hand. So what we would call it today, I've heard it called, like I said, an open string or alternate string pull-off. So he's calling it here a pluck. Gibson says, I define a pluck as the picking of a string with your left hand. So you're picking it with your left hand, open. This technique was used quite often by some old-timers. You know, just saw me do it in the demonstration where I was doing it repeatedly. That's sort of this East Kentucky drone lick that you'll hear in like Rufus Crisp or George Gibson or John Haywood or myself or Matt Kinman, people who learned from George Gibson. We use this technique. You'll see us using it. Usually on the first string. And now back to what Gibson is saying. I'm sorry to ramble, y'all. I just get excited about this material. So back to Gibson, he says, Mel Ambergy said to me once, quote, there is more music in the first string of the banjo than in any other string, end quote. He would often pluck this string on the offbeat to make a unique background for some of the songs he played and sang. I use this technique still on some tunes I play. I will outline one method of doing this. And he goes on to describe in writing, ooh, that boy made a nasty mess. He goes on to describe in writing how the technique is accomplished. It's an alternate string pull-off. So I've got videos on that. You can look up any fool who teaches guitar lessons on YouTube will teach you alternate string pull-off, nothing to it. So that's cool. And that's all what I'm doing there in Darling Cora is